Fayus Miller was 32 years old when he decided to camp alone in the Catskill Mountains after his mother's suspicious death. What should have been a journey of grief and reflection transformed into a night of absolute terror when he saw two glowing red eyes in the darkness, too high to belong to any known animal, and a skeletal hand waving at him through the blackness. Fleeing in total panic, he found shelter with forest rangers who protected him until dawn. But morning brought no answers, no tracks, no evidence, only silence and mountains that kept their secrets. Months later, when Fayus saw those same red eyes reflected in the rearview mirror of a car at his mechanic shop in Albany, he understood a terrifying truth. Some things you encounter in the forest never really let you go. They follow you home. They wait in reflections and shadows. They remind you that the boundary between the world of the living and whatever exists beyond it is thinner than anyone wants to believe. This is a true account of a man who went to the mountains seeking peace and found something that had been waiting in those woods for longer than human memory could measure. Evelyn Miller died in circumstances that nobody in the family could accept as accidental. The police called it a fall down the stairs. She was 63 years old, lived alone since divorcing Fayus' stepfather Rick Lawson 5 years prior, and had apparently tripped while descending to the basement at 3 in the morning. But Evelyn had no reason to be in the basement at that hour. No history of insomnia or nighttime wandering. And the autopsy revealed bruising on her neck and wrist that seemed inconsistent with a simple fall. Fayus insisted on deeper investigation, but detectives found doors locked from inside, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of third parties in the house. The case was filed as accidental death despite the doubts that consumed Fayus like slow-burning fire eating him from within. 2 weeks after the funeral, Fayus requested leave from work. He was a mechanic at a small shop in Albany, fixed transmissions, and changed oil and listened to customers complain about strange noises their cars made. His boss granted 2 weeks without question, recognizing that Fayus had been operating on autopilot since receiving news about Evelyn. Fayus packed camping equipment he hadn't used in years: tent, sleeping bag, gas lantern, basic supplies. He needed to get out of the city, needed silence and solitude, needed to process grief away from people offering empty platitudes and pitying looks that made his skin burn with frustrated anger he couldn't properly direct or release. The Catskill Mountains were 3 hours by car, a region where Evelyn used to take him as a child before she married Rick, and life became too complicated for family trips. Fayus remembered camping with her near cold clear lakes, hiking trails covered in fallen leaves, sitting around campfires while she told stories about her own childhood in these same mountains. These were the memories he wanted to hold on to, not the image of her lying at the bottom of the basement stairs with her neck at an impossible angle and her eyes staring at nothing. He drove with windows open, music off, just the sound of wind and road filling the space where thoughts normally lived. The journey passed in a fog of memories and poorly processed grief that sat heavy in his chest. He arrived at the designated campground in late afternoon, a remote area administered by the Forest Service. Few campers even during high season, perfect for someone who wanted to avoid human interaction entirely. Fayus checked in with a ranger at the entrance station, an older man named Neil who gave him a map and basic safety information about bays and fire protocols. Camping alone? Neil asked, eyebrows raised with poorly disguised concern for a solitary camper in this isolated area. Yes, Fayus replied, his tone discouraging further questions or well-meaning advice. Neil nodded understandingly, perhaps recognizing the look of someone who needed to be alone with their thoughts. Well, keep your food stored against bays, don't leave fire unattended, and if you need anything the station stays open until 10 p.m. I'll be here with Ranger Tom. Fayus drove to his designated site and began setting up camp with efficiency born from years of forgotten practice, his muscles remembering movements his conscious mind had archived. The physical activity helped calm the anxiety that had been building since he left Albany that morning. He gathered wood for a fire, organized his equipment, prepared a simple meal akin food heated over flames that danced and crackled in the gathering darkness. The sun descended slowly through the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and finally deep navy blue as night claimed the forest. Stars began appearing, more visible here far from city light pollution, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Fayus sat by the fire and allowed himself to finally cry, not just for his mother, but for everything that had been lost and could never be recovered, for the life she should have had and the answers he would never receive about how it ended. Faius woke at 2:43 a.m. according to the luminous watch on his wrist. Something had pulled him from restless sleep, but he couldn't identify what. Maybe a sound, maybe just primitive instinct alerting humans to danger even during unconsciousness. He lay completely still inside his sleeping bag, holding his breath, listening with every fiber of his attention to the forest around his small tent. The woods had gone silent. No more owls calling. No more wind in the trees. Just thick oppressive silence that seemed unnatural in its weight and completeness. The kind of silence that happens when predators approach, and all-wise prey freezes hoping danger will pass them by without noticing their presence. Then he heard it. Footsteps. But not the normal kind of animal sounds moving through underbrush. These were deliberate, measured, walking in a circle around his tent with purposeful intent. Faius told himself it was a bear investigating the campsite looking for food, though he had been careful to store everything in a bear-proof container 50 meters away as instructed by the ranger. Or maybe deer or elk passing through the area on their nightly routes. But the footsteps didn't sound like hooves or paws on forest floor. They sounded almost bipedal, almost human, almost but not quite, with a dragging quality that made his skin crawl with instinctive revulsion. He reached slowly for his flashlight, fingers trembling as they searched for the switch in darkness. The footsteps stopped directly beside the tent entrance. Faius could hear breathing now, heavy and wet with a rasping quality like damaged lungs or obstructed throat trying to pull air through passages that weren't quite right. Not animal breathing, but not exactly human either. Something between. Something wrong. He pressed the flashlight button, and the beam cut through the tent's darkness, illuminating thin nylon that was all separating him from whatever stood outside. 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the thing outside moved, and its shadow projected against the tent wall by moonlight, a shape too tall and too thin. Proportions all wrong, arms too long and head at an angle that no human neck should achieve. Faius' hand shot to the tent zipper, some part of his brain screaming that he needed to see what was out there, needed to confront it with light and rationality and prove it was just his imagination amplified by grief and isolation. But before he could pull the zipper down, the thing outside made a sound. Not a growl or roar or any noise an animal would make. A sound almost like laughter, high and broken and completely devoid of anything resembling humor or human emotion. The kind of sound that bypassed conscious thought and went straight to the oldest part of the brain where terror lived. Faius froze with his hand on the zipper, every survival instinct screaming at him not to open that tent, not to look at whatever was making that sound. Then he saw them. 2 points of red light appearing at the top of the shadow, roughly where eyes would be if the thing was standing upright but far too high off the ground to be anything natural. The red lights blazed brighter, casting faint crimson glow against the tent fabric, and Faius watched in paralyzed horror as something that might have been a hand, skeletal and wrong, fingers too long and joints bending in directions human fingers didn't bend, raise itself into view against the tent wall. The hand waved, a slow, deliberate gesture of greeting or mockery or summons, back and forth, the red eyes watching, the wet breathing continuing. And Faius understood with sudden, terrible clarity that whatever stood outside his tent was not leaving, was not passing through, was waiting for him to open that zipper and invite it inside. Faius didn't remember making the conscious decision to run. One moment he was frozen in his sleeping bag, staring at the skeletal hand waving against the tent wall. The next he was tearing at the zipper with shaking fingers, bursting out of the tent into cold night air and sprinting blindly into the forest. His flashlight beam bounced wildly as he ran, illuminating trees and rocks and his own feet stumbling over roots and fallen branches. Behind him he heard that terrible laughter again, closer now, followed by the sound of something large crashing through underbrush in pursuit. Faius didn't look back. Looking back meant slowing down, and slowing down meant being caught by whatever that thing was. He ran without direction, without plan, pure panic driving him deeper into woods he didn't know with only a failing flashlight to guide him. Branches whipped his face and tore at his clothes. His lungs burned with the effort of pulling an A at full sprint over uneven terrain in darkness. Twice he fell, hitting the ground hard enough to drive the breath from his body, scrambling back to his feet before his conscious mind could register the pain. The pursuing sound stayed consistent behind him, not gaining but not falling back either, as if whatever chased him was capable of matching his pace exactly without effort or fatigue that normal living things experienced. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Ferris burst out of dense forest into a clearing and recognized with desperate relief the ranger station he had checked in at that afternoon. Lights were on inside despite the late hour. He sprinted for the door and pounded on it with both fists, not caring about noise or propriety or anything except getting inside where walls and locked doors might provide protection from whatever hunted him through the darkness. "Help! Please! Something's chasing me. Please open the door." His voice came out high and broken with terror that he couldn't disguise or control. The door opened immediately and Ranger Neil stood there in pajamas and robe, eyes widening as he took in Ferris' appearance. Torn clothes, bleeding scratches on face and arms, eyes wild with fear and shock. "Jesus, what happened? Get inside now." Neil pulled Ferris through the doorway and slammed it shut, throwing the deadbolt and chain lock. Ranger Tom appeared from the back room pulling on pants and boots, moving with the quick efficiency of someone trained to respond to emergencies. "I saw something," Ferris gasped out between heaving breaths. "At my campsite. Red eyes. Tall. It chased me. It's out there right now. It followed me here. I heard it the whole way." The two rangers exchanged glances that Ferris couldn't quite interpret. Concern mixed with something else, maybe doubt or maybe recognition. "Sit down," Tom said, guiding Ferris to a chair while Neil moved to the window and peered out through blinds into darkness beyond the station lights. "You're safe here. Whatever you saw, it can't get in. These doors are solid steel for a reason, and we've got protocol for dangerous wildlife encounters." But Ferris shook his head violently. It wasn't wildlife. It wasn't any animal. It was tall as a man, but wrong. All wrong. Proportions weren't right, and it had these glowing red eyes, and it waved at me. It stood outside my tent and waved like it was inviting me to come out and play or like it was mocking me. His voice was rising toward hysteria, and he could hear it but couldn't control it. Neil returned from the window and put a hand on Ferris' shoulder. "Okay, we believe you. We'll stay here until morning, all of us together, and then we'll go back to your campsite in daylight and see what we find." Dawn came slowly to the Catskills, gray light filtering through trees and gradually illuminating a forest that looked completely benign in daylight. Just woods, just nature, nothing sinister or threatening visible in the peaceful morning landscape. Ferris had spent the remaining hours before sunrise sitting in the ranger station drinking coffee that Tom kept brewing, wrapped in a blanket because he couldn't stop shaking despite the room's warmth. Neither ranger had pushed him for more details about what he saw, just let him sit in silence while they took turns keeping watch of the windows and making periodic radio calls to check in with the main Forest Service office about the incident. At first light, the three of them set out toward Ferris' campsite, rangers armed with radios and bear spray and that calm professional competence that came from years working in wilderness areas. Ferris led the way, though his memory of his panic flight through darkness was fragmented and unreliable. He kept recognizing landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a fallen tree with exposed roots, a stream crossing, but couldn't say with certainty they were following the exact route he had run. After 20 minutes of hiking, they found the campsite, tent still standing exactly as Ferris had left it when he bolted in terror hours earlier. Neil and Tom conducted a thorough search of the area, walking in expanding circles around the tent, examining the ground for tracks or signs of disturbance. Ferris watched from near his tent, reluctant to approach the spot where the thing had stood waving at him through the fabric. The ranger's search turned up nothing unusual. Some deer tracks, normal forest debris, the ash from Ferris' campfire from a previous evening. No large bipedal footprints. No disturbed vegetation suggesting something tall and heavy had moved through the area. No physical evidence whatsoever that anything out of the ordinary had visited this campsite during the night. "Mr. Miller," Neil said carefully, returning to where Ferris stood hugging himself despite the warming morning air. "I'm not saying you didn't see something. Fear is real even when its source isn't. You're grieving, you're isolated, you're in an unfamiliar environment. The mind can play powerful tricks under those circumstances. Shadows become shapes. Normal animal sounds become threatening. It's actually quite common for solo campers to report strange experiences, especially when they are dealing with emotional trauma." Ferris wanted to argue, wanted to insist that what he saw was absolutely real and not imagination or grief-induced hallucination. But looking at the peaceful campsite in morning light, hearing birds singing and wind rustling through leaves, it became harder to hold on to the visceral terror of the previous night. Tom helped Ferris pack up his camping gear, the tent and sleeping bag and supplies that seemed ridiculous now in their normalcy and ordinariness. "I'd recommend heading home," Tom said, his tone gentle but firm. "You came here to process your mother's death, and sometimes that processing needs to happen somewhere safer, somewhere with support systems around you. There's no shame in recognizing when isolation isn't helping." Fayus nodded numbly, loading his car with the ranger's assistance. He drove away from the Catskills without looking back, exhaustion finally overwhelming adrenaline and fear. Maybe they were right. Maybe grief had conjured monsters from shadows and normal forest sounds. Maybe he needed therapy and medication and time to heal rather than camping trips into wilderness areas. Maybe the red eyes and skeletal hand waving had been nothing more than his traumatized mind trying to externalize pain it couldn't process internally. 3 months passed. Fayus returned to his job at the mechanic shop, fell back into routine of oil changes and brake jobs and the comfortable rhythm of work that required his hands but not his heart. He saw a therapist twice a week who prescribed antidepressants and taught him breathing exercises and validated his grief while gently suggesting that the Catskills experience had been a stress-induced hallucination brought on by unresolved trauma about his mother's death. Fayus wanted to believe that explanation, wanted to file the entire night under temporary break from reality and move forward with his life. Some days he even succeeded in believing it. On a Thursday afternoon in October, Fayus was under a Honda Accord replacing a leaking oil pan when he heard the shop bell chime indicating a customer had entered. He finished tightening the bolt he was working on and slid out from under the vehicle, wiping his hands on his coveralls as he stood. A man stood at the counter, middle-aged, average height, wearing business casual clothes and an expression of mild impatience common to people whose car problems interrupted their workday schedules. "Help you?" Fayus asked, moving toward the counter where the man had already placed his keys. "Car's making a grinding noise when I braked," the customer explained. "Probably needs new pads, but I figured I should have someone look at it before it gets worse." Fayus nodded and took the keys. Toyota Camry, fairly new model, probably routine maintenance that would take an hour tops. He walked outside to the parking lot where the Camry sat in visitor parking, its metallic gray paint catching afternoon sunlight. He unlocked the car and slid into the driver's seat, adjusting it back to accommodate his longer legs, reaching to start the engine and pull the vehicle into the bay. That's when he saw them in the rearview mirror. 2 red lights, glowing from the back seat. The same red eyes he had seen in the Catskills 3 months ago, impossibly high off the seat, burning with that same awful crimson luminescence. Fayus' breath caught in his throat. His hands froze on the steering wheel. In the mirror, he could see the outline of something tall and thin sitting in the back seat, something that had no business existing in daylight in a customer's car in an Albany parking lot. The thing leaned forward slowly, and Fayus saw in the mirror's reflection that skeletal hand raising itself, fingers too long and joints wrong, beginning that same slow waving gesture. Back and forth, back and forth. Fayus didn't scream, didn't run, just sat completely still with his eyes locked on the rearview mirror while the thing in the back seat waved at him, and those red eyes blazed brighter, brighter, until they filled the entire mirror with crimson light. And in that moment Fayus understood with absolute certainty what the therapist's explanations had tried to obscure, that what he encountered in the Catskills hadn't been hallucination or stress-induced psychosis. It had been real, was still real, had followed him home from those mountains, and was now sitting in the back seat of a customer's Camry in broad daylight, reminding him that some things you see in the darkness never let you go. That grief might have brought him to the mountains, but what found him there existed independently of his trauma, and that the boundary between the world he knew and whatever realm that thing inhabited was thinner than anyone wanted to believe, permeable enough for something to cross over and never cross back. Jessica Hull's 24th birthday was supposed to be perfect. She had rented a beautiful Airbnb an hour outside the city. 3 bedrooms, modern kitchen, a backyard with string lights and enough space to host the intimate gathering she had planned. 20 close friends and family, catered food from a local restaurant that specialized in small events, a weekend to celebrate being young and alive and surrounded by people who loved her. Her best friend Harper had helped plan everything. Her brother Marcus had driven up from college to surprise her, and her cousin Jake had volunteered to help coordinate the catering staff who would handle setup and service so Jessica could actually enjoy her own party. The caterer had sent confirmation that morning. 2 servers would arrive at 6 p.m. to set up the buffet table, serve drinks, and handle cleanup afterward. Jessica spent the afternoon decorating the Airbnb with Harper, hanging balloons and streamers, setting up a playlist of Jessica's favorite songs, arranging the gift table in the corner of the living room. Guests began arriving around 5:30, bringing bottles of wine and wrap presents and the cheerful chaos of people greeting each other and complimenting the venue. By 6:15 everyone had arrived except the catering staff, and Jessica was starting to worry that something had gone wrong with the order. Then the doorbell rang and Jake answered to find two young men in black server uniforms carrying insulated food containers. "Sorry we're late," the taller one said, flashing a professional smile. "Traffic was worse than expected. I'm Tom and this is Alex. We're from Celebrations Catering and we got everything you ordered plus some extras the chef sent as a birthday gift." They bustled in with the efficiency of experienced service staff, setting up the buffet table with practiced ease, arranging food that smelled amazing and looked professionally presented. Jessica thanked them profusely, offered them drinks which they politely declined, and then got swept back into the party as more friends demanded her attention. The servers moved through the party with smooth competence, refilling drinks and clearing empty plates, and generally being invisible in the way good service staff learned to be. Jessica noticed Alex seemed particularly attentive, always appearing exactly when someone needed something, always ready with a napkin or a fresh drink or friendly comment. Around 8 p.m. Jake brought out the birthday cake, 3 layers of chocolate with cream cheese frosting, candles blazing on top, and everyone gathered around to sing while Jessica made a wish and blew out the candles to enthusiastic applause and cheering from her friends. That's when Harper screamed. The sound cut through the celebration like a knife, all conversation stopping instantly as everyone turned to see what caused the panic. Harper was pointing at Alex, who had his hand in the pile of birthday gifts on the table in the corner, clearly trying to slip something into the large bag he carried. The fake server looked up, made eye contact with Harper, and his expression transformed from professional friendliness to something cold and calculating. He dropped the gift he'd been stealing, and his hand went to his pocket, pulling out not another stolen item but a knife, small but wickedly sharp, the kind a blade meant for one purpose only. "Nobody move," he said, his voice completely different now, stripped of the friendly service industry tone. "Nobody does anything stupid and nobody gets hurt." Alex backed toward the door with a knife held in front of him, eyes scanning the room full of frozen party guests who had gone from celebration to hostage situation in seconds. Marcus, Jessica's brother, started to move forward with the foolish bravery of a 20-year-old college athlete who thought he could disarm an armed man, but Jake grabbed his arm and held him back with grip that said, "Don't be an idiot. This isn't a movie. People get killed doing stupid hero shit." "The gifts stay here," Alex said, apparently abandoning his theft now that the plan had fallen apart. "I'm walking out that door and nobody follows me and nobody calls the cops for at least 10 minutes or Tom's gonna hurt somebody. Understand?" Everyone nodded, too shocked to do anything else. Alex reached behind him for the doorknob, opened it without taking his eyes off the crowd, and slipped out into the night. For a moment nobody moved, the party frozen in tableau of interrupted celebration and violated trust. Then Jessica found her voice. "Where's Tom? Where's the other server?" They looked around the room, counted heads, realized that Tom had vanished at some point during the chaos without anyone noticing his exit. Harper was the first to move, pulling out her phone to call 911, her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold the device. Jake headed toward the bathroom in the hallway, something nagging at his memory. He had seen the real catering staff before when Jessica showed him their website, and something about these servers had felt off all evening, but he couldn't articulate what exactly bothered him. He knocked on the bathroom door. No answer. He tried the handle and found it locked. "Hello? Is someone in there?" Silence. Then a faint groan, barely audible through the wooden door. Jake's blood went cold. He stepped back and kicked the door hard, the lock giving way on the second impact. Inside the bathroom, slumped between the toilet and the wall, was a young man in server uniform, unconscious but breathing. Jake recognized him from the catering company's website. The real Alex, not the imposter who had just fled with a knife. The real server had been drugged or knocked out and hidden in here while the fake ones worked the party, stealing gifts and probably casing the Airbnb for valuables worth taking in a return visit. Jake checked for a pulse, steady if slow, and yelled for someone to bring water and call for an ambulance along with the police who Harper was already speaking to on her phone. Police arrived within 15 minutes, taking statements from shaken party guests who had just watched their friend's birthday celebration transform into a crime scene. Detective Ruiz, a tired-looking woman in her 40s who gave the impression she had seen too much human awfulness to be surprised by anything, took notes while Jessica explained about the catering order and how the fake servers had arrived late and seemed professional enough that nobody questioned their presence. The real Alex was transported to the hospital suffering from what appeared to be Rohypnol or similar incapacitation drug. The real Tom was found an hour later in his van 3 blocks away, similarly drugged, his uniform missing along with all the identification and food containers that had given the imposters their cover. Detective Ruiz explained what they were likely dealing with, a sophisticated theft operation that targeted parties and events, replaced real catering staff with criminals who spent hours inside homes casing valuable items while appearing to provide legitimate service. The imposter staff would steal what they could during the event, note locations of expensive electronics and jewelry for potential future break-ins, and disappear before anyone realized the real catering staff had never arrived. "You're actually lucky," Ruiz said, though Jessica didn't feel lucky at all. Most victims don't catch the theft in progress. They don't realize they've been robbed until days later when they notice missing items and can't prove who took them or when. Your friend Harper's quick eyes probably saved you from losing a lot more than you did. The party ended with police still processing the scene, guests leaving in small groups with hugs and promises to check in tomorrow, birthday cake uneaten and presents unopened because they were now evidence in an active investigation. Jessica sat on the Airbnb's porch with Harper and Marcus, wrapped in shock blankets that a thoughtful paramedic had provided even though nobody was physically injured. "Best birthday ever," Jessica said with gallows humor that made Harper laugh despite tears streaming down her face. They sat together watching police cars' flashing lights paint the neighborhood in red and blue, wondering how something as simple as a birthday party had turned into a crime scene, and grateful that the worst-case scenario, whatever the imposter servers had planned if their theft hadn't been interrupted, had been avoided through pure chance and Harper's observant eyes catching movement in a pile of gifts. Laura Bennett had worked as a cashier at the Pizza Hut in Tucson for 2 years, and thought she had dealt with every variety of difficult customer the job could offer. People angry about delivery times. People convinced their order was wrong despite it matching exactly what they requested. People trying to scam free food by claiming their pizza was burned or cold or missing toppings when the evidence clearly showed otherwise. But Richard Hanks was something different. Something that set off alarm bells in Laura's mind on the very first phone call when he complained that his pizza was too spicy despite ordering the mild sauce option explicitly listed on his receipt. "I understand you're unhappy, Mr. Hanks," Laura said with the practiced patience of someone trained to de-escalate customer service situations. "But our mild sauce is our least spicy option. If you like, we can offer you a discount on your next order or..." Richard cut her off, his voice rising with anger that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "I don't want a discount on my next order. I want you to send me a new pizza right now that actually tastes the way I ordered it. This one is inedible. It's burning my mouth. Your cook clearly messed up, and I want it fixed immediately." Laura looked at the order ticket. Mild sauce, pepperoni, and mushrooms. Nothing that should cause any heat or spice issues. "Sir, I can't authorize a replacement for an order that was made correctly. If you'd like to speak to my manager." Richard hung up. Laura shrugged and went back to her other duties, taking orders, ringing up customers, coordinating with the kitchen on delivery times. 15 minutes later, Richard called back, this time even angrier, demanding to speak to the manager. Paul, the evening shift manager, took the call and explained the same thing Laura had. The order was correct as placed. They couldn't replace food that met specifications just because a customer changed their mind about what they wanted. Richard's response was a string of profanity creative enough that Paul hung up on him mid-sentence and added a note to their system flagging the customer as potentially abusive to staff. 20 minutes after that, Richard appeared in person. He walked into the Pizza Hut carrying the pizza box, slammed it down on the counter hard enough to make Laura jump, and began a loud tirade about terrible service and incompetent employees and how he was going to report this location to corporate and get everyone fired. Paul emerged from the back office and attempted to calm the situation, offering a full refund just to get Richard out of the store before his behavior scared away other customers. Richard took the refund, snatched the cash from Paul's hand, and left with parting threats about online reviews and lawsuits and consequences for disrespecting a paying customer. That guy was unhinged, Kevin, the delivery driver, said, watching through the window as Richard climbed into his pickup truck in the parking lot. Like, genuinely scary, unhinged, not just normal customer angry. Paul agreed, but figured that would be the end of it. They refunded his money, flag his number in the system, and if he ordered again, they'd simply decline to serve him and recommend he try a different pizza place. They went back to work, serving the dinner rush, completely unprepared for what happened 15 minutes later when Richard's truck came screaming back into the parking lot and began doing slow circles around the building. Laura was the first to notice. She was at the register helping a family with 3 young children when movement outside caught her eye. Richard's distinctive blue pickup truck circling the building at walking speed. Richard visible in the driver's seat with something in his hand. Something black and metallic that Laura's brain initially refused to identify, but that Kevin recognized immediately. Gun! He's got a gun. Everybody get down. Kevin's shout sent the family with 3 children diving to the floor, sent Laura dropping behind the counter, sent Paul scrambling for the phone to dial 911 while trying to simultaneously lock the front door and get all customers and staff to safety in the back kitchen area. Through the large front windows, they could see Richard completing another slow circle, the gun now clearly visible pointing out his driver's side window, aimed directly at the building where people's lives hung in the balance of whatever rage or mental break had transformed a pizza complaint into an active shooter situation. The 911 operator kept Paul on the line, while police units scrambled to respond to the armed threat at the Pizza Hut on North Oracle Road. Laura crouched behind the counter with a family of 3 children, the parents covering their kids with their own bodies while the children whimpered in confused terror at the sudden chaos. Kevin had herded the other customers and staff into the walk-in cooler at the back of the kitchen. Not ideal shelter, but it had a thick door and no windows that bullets could penetrate. Through the front windows, they could all see Richard's truck completing another slow circuit, gun visible each time he passed the front entrance. Tucson Police Department arrived with impressive speed. First patrol car sliding into the parking lot within 4 minutes of Paul's call, followed quickly by 3 more units and a supervisor's vehicle. Officers took positions behind their cars, weapons drawn, using loudspeakers to order Richard to stop the vehicle and exit with his hands visible. Richard responded by accelerating suddenly, tires squealing as he whipped the truck around in a tight circle and pointed the gun out his window toward the police line. Officers ducked behind their vehicles, training and protocol warring with the adrenaline of facing an armed suspect who seemed increasingly unstable and unpredictable. This is a Tucson Police Department. The loudspeaker blared. Stop your vehicle immediately. Turn off the engine and exit with your hands above your head. You are surrounded. There is no way out of the situation except compliance. Stop the vehicle now. Richard didn't stop. Instead, he completed another circle, this time driving up onto the sidewalk and getting close enough to the building that Laura could see his face through the window, red and contorted with rage or fear or some combination of emotions that had pushed him past the point of rational decision-making. His finger was on the trigger. One squeeze and bullets would come through those windows into the space where terrified people huddled praying for police intervention to end this before anyone got hurt. A spike strip deployed by officers punctured the truck's front tires on the next pass. Richard's vehicle lurched sideways as rubber shredded, rim scraping asphalt with a sound like nails on a chalkboard amplified 1,000 times. The truck slowed but didn't stop, Richard fighting the steering wheel trying to maintain control as the vehicle listed heavily to one side. For a moment, it seemed like he might crash directly into the Pizza Hut's front wall, but he managed to correct course at the last second, the truck coming to rest at an angle blocking the parking lot entrance. Richard sat in the driver's seat for 3 long seconds, gun still visible, police shouting commands, the standoff stretching into a moment that felt frozen in time. Then he threw the gun out the window onto the pavement, raised both hands above his head, and began to cry. Loud, ugly sobs that carried across the parking lot as officers approached with weapons still drawn, shouting instructions about how to exit the vehicle safely and where to put his hands and how to lie face down on the ground. Richard complied with all of it, blubbering apologies and explanations about his medication being wrong and the stress at work and how he didn't mean to scare anyone. He just wanted his pizza complaint taken seriously. He just wanted respect. He just wanted someone to listen to him for once in his miserable life. Officers handcuffed him and led him to a patrol car while others secured the weapon and began processing the scene as evidence. Laura emerged from behind the counter on shaking legs, helping the family with 3 children stand up, watching through the window as Richard was placed in the back of a police car, still crying like a child who had been caught doing something wrong and couldn't understand why there were consequences. The whole incident from first circle of the building to Richard's surrender had lasted less than 12 minutes. 12 minutes that felt like hours. 12 minutes that transformed a Tuesday evening shift at Pizza Hut into a trauma that everyone present would carry for the rest of their lives. Detective Morrison arrived to take statements, a heavy-set man with kind eyes who seemed genuinely concerned about the staff's well-being beyond just collecting evidence for prosecution. Richard Hanks, Morrison said, reading from a preliminary background check on his phone. 52 years old, unemployed since being laid off 6 months ago from a manufacturing plant. History of minor disturbance calls, but nothing violent until tonight. Looks like he stopped taking his prescribed medication about 3 weeks ago, according to his ex-wife, who we contacted as next of kin. The detective looked up at the shaken Pizza Hut employees. I'm not excusing what he did. He made choices tonight that could have gotten people killed. But I want you to understand, this probably wasn't really about the pizza. People break. Sometimes it's big things. Sometimes it's small things. But when they break, it comes out sideways at whoever happens to be nearby. Paul nodded numbly, still processing the fact that his assistant manager's decision to refuse a pizza replacement had nearly resulted in a mass shooting at his restaurant. What happens to him now? Laura asked, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. Morrison closed his phone. Assault with a deadly weapon, multiple counts. Terroristic threats. Reckless endangerment. Is looking at serious prison time, and given his mental state, he'll probably end up in a psychiatric facility first for evaluation and treatment. He'll never legally own a firearm again. And honestly, given what we found in his truck, ammunition, additional weapons, a notebook with rambling writing about people who had wronged him, I think you all got very lucky tonight that he surrendered instead of escalating further. The Pizza Hut closed for the rest of the week while corporate sent crisis counselors to meet with staff, and while the building underwent repairs where Richard's truck had damaged the sidewalk and landscaping. Laura took a leave of absence, found she couldn't sleep without seeing Richard's face in the window and his finger on that trigger. Kevin quit outright, decided delivering pizzas wasn't worth dying over, took a job at his uncle's construction company where the worst threat was falling off a ladder. Paul stayed on but developed a nervous tic whenever the phone rang, always expecting another Richard Hanks on the other end with complaints that would spiral into violence. Richard Hanks pleaded guilty to all charges in a deal that sent him to a psychiatric facility for 5 years minimum before transfer to regular prison. The judge read a statement at sentencing about mental health resources and the importance of medication compliance and how society failed people like Richard until they broke and hurt others. Laura attended the sentencing, needed to see Richard in shackles and orange jumpsuit, needed the closure of watching him led away to consequences. He looked smaller in the courtroom, diminished and sedated, and nothing like the terrifying figure who had circled the Pizza Hut with murder in his eyes. He didn't look at her or apologize or acknowledge the terror he had caused. Just shuffled out between guards while Laura sat in the gallery thinking about how a pizza complaint had nearly ended multiple lives over mild sauce that wasn't spicy at all. These 10 stories share a common thread that runs deeper than their surface details of unknown callers and highway disappearances and birthday parties gone wrong. They reveal the fragility of the normalcy we take for granted every day. Emily thought she was safe in her own apartment until the bathroom door locked itself from the inside, and breathing came through walls where no one should be breathing. Brandon Lawson thought he was safe on a Texas highway until something chased him into darkness and left only his voice on a 911 call as evidence of terror that made no sense. Michael Torres thought his son was safe sleeping in his own bed until kidnappers proved that locks and windows and parental vigilance weren't enough against determined evil. Ryan Parker thought a vacation with his best friend would be fun until a girlfriend he barely knew attacked him with a knife in a hotel room and taught him that violence hides behind ordinary faces. Ferris Miller thought grief was the worst thing he would face in the Catskills until Red Eyes appeared in darkness and waved a skeletal hand, following him home months later to remind him that some things don't stay in the mountains where you found them. Jessica Hall thought her birthday party was safe until imposter servers reveal how easily criminals can infiltrate the most innocent celebrations. Laura Bennett thought serving pizza was a boring, safe job until a customer's rage over mild sauce escalated to circling the building with a gun pointed at windows. The pattern repeats across all these accounts. Ordinary moments transformed into nightmares without warning or adequate preparation. A phone rings with unknown caller, and suddenly a week of terror begins. A truck runs out of gas on a lonely highway and a man vanishes into mystery that 11 years can't solve. A father goes to work and returns to find his son's body delivered in a box. A camping trip to process grief becomes an encounter with something that defies explanation. A birthday cake is brought out and seconds later a thief pulls a knife. A pizza complaint becomes an armed standoff. The boundary between normal life and absolute horror is thinner than anyone wants to believe, permeable enough that crossing it requires nothing more than bad luck or bad timing or being in the wrong place when darkness decides to reveal itself. What makes these stories particularly disturbing is their lack of resolution or satisfying explanation. Emily never learned who called a family for a week with nothing but heavy breathing and silence. Deputy Mark Evans never discovered what happened to Brandon Lawson in those missing moments between his terrified 911 call and his death in an empty field. Michael Torres received no comfort from the arrest and conviction of his son's killers because Daniel stayed dead regardless of justice served. Fayus Miller found no answers about the red eyes and the Catskills because the Rangers found no evidence and therapy dismissed it as hallucination despite those same eyes appearing months later in a customer's car. The imposter servers at Jessica's party were never caught despite police investigation. Richard Hanks went to prison, but his victims still carry the trauma of those 12 minutes when death circled the Pizza Hut. These are the stories we don't want to hear because they confirm our deepest fears about the world, that safety is illusion, that evil exists in both human and possibly inhuman forms, that terrible things happen to ordinary people for no reason that makes sense or provides meaning. They remind us that bathroom doors can lock from the inside when no one is there, that highways can swallow people who call for help, that kidnappers can take children from locked homes, that vacation friends can turn violent, that mountains hold things older and stranger than human understanding, that birthday parties can be infiltrated by criminals, that pizza complaint can escalate to attempted murder. They remind us that the darkness is always there, always waiting, always capable of reaching into the light and dragging someone screaming into mystery or violence or death. So what do we do with this knowledge? How do we live knowing that Emily's unknown caller might dial our number next, that we might be the next Brandon Lawson vanishing from a highway, that our children might be taken despite our best efforts to protect them, that vacations and birthdays and ordinary workdays can transform into crime scenes without warning. We do what humans have always done when faced with the darkness. We acknowledge it exists, we take what precautions we can, and then we live anyway because the alternative is paralysis and fear. We lock our doors knowing locks can be picked. We answer our phones despite unknown numbers. We let our children grow up and take risks. We go on vacations and celebrate birthdays and serve pizza to strangers. We camp in mountains and drive lonely highways and trust that most of the time, most days, the darkness will leave us alone. But these 10 stories serve as reminders, cautionary tales in the oldest tradition of human storytelling, that sometimes the darkness doesn't leave us alone. Sometimes it reaches out with skeletal hands waving through tent fabric. Sometimes it breathes through walls and locks bathroom doors from the inside. Sometimes it chases us down highways and follows us home months later. Sometimes it was the face of a girlfriend or a caterer or a pizza customer until the mask slips and reveals the violence underneath. And when those moments come, when the boundary between ordinary life and nightmare dissolves, we learn what we're truly made of. We learn whether we run or fight or freeze. We learn how much terror the human mind can process before breaking. We learn that survival is sometimes just luck and timing, and the mercy of whatever hunted us deciding to let us live this time. These stories happen to real people, Emily and Brandon Lawson and Michael Torres and Ryan Parker and Fayus Miller and Jessica Hall and Laura Bennett. They survived to tell what happened, though survival came with cost measured in trauma and changed worldviews and the knowledge that safety is temporary and conditional and can be revoked without warning. Their stories become our warnings. Their experiences map the dangerous territories where ordinary life intersects with the darkness that waits in unknown phone numbers and empty highways and locked bathroom doors and glowing red eyes that follow you home from mountains that never forget. Listen to their warnings. Remember their stories. And when your own phone rings from an unknown number, when you're alone on a dark highway, when something moves in shadows when nothing should be moving, remember that the darkness is real and it's always hungry, and sometimes, despite our best efforts and careful precautions, it reaches out and touches us anyway. The screen fades to black. The last sound is breathing, heavy and wet and deliberate, coming from somewhere close but impossible to locate. Then silence. Then nothing. Then the knowledge that somewhere, right now, Someone else's ordinary day is about to become the next story of terror that defies explanation and offers no comfort except the cold truth that they survived to tell it. For now,